Tonight, I am going to be continuing to talk on the book Interconnection by Yalwan Karmapa. And I am starting the third section of the book, which is titled Living the Connection. And this third and last section talks about what is needed to be done to bring the intellectual and emotional understanding into the world that will allow us to live together more sustainably, more compassionately on an interconnected planet. So this particular chapter is called Sharing the Resources, and this is about discarding the compare and compete approach to success that is presently, you might say, popular around the world, and replacing it with a more useful paradigm. And it's interesting, he used the word paradigm. So I looked up that word for you that might not know what exactly that means. And one meaning is a cognitive framework shared by members of any discipline or group. Example, the company's business paradigm needs updating for a new generation. This is right off of the internet and kind of a little bit like what Karmapa is doing here. Here is an informal use of the word paradigm. A general mental model or framework for anything. And the example was their first album completely blew apart any paradigm for what rock music could be. And then this is also one that I liked. An example serving as a model for others to imitate. A pattern. Example, Pelham's Dairy's 10-year-old aged cheddar is the paradigm of cheddar. So this is Wisconsin, and we've got to have a cheese involved in this some way or another. So those are three definitions and three different examples of what a paradigm means. In the 21st century, and we are living in the 21st century, that it needs to be a century of sharing, Karmapa says, that this comparison and competing paradigm is counterproductive to this vision. So this chapter looks at the resources that we can draw on to change the paradigm, that the comparison and competition are not natural, but they're so ingrained that they may seem that way, is a point that he makes. The foundation of this point of view is of this paradigm of compete and comparison is that there are separate, independent selves with boundaries that are not connected to each other, that others are seen as also having boundaries. And then as a result, there's comparison and desire. You want more than other people have, or at least as much. And then there's competition. And of course, there's no limit to desire. So in a way, there's no limit to how much competition you can have. You could always have more. And as a result of this, and the world's resources being limited, it puts a lot of strain on the world's resources. And countries will amass and control resources, businesses will do the same. And well, basically, with this kind of framework, life is treated as a zero-sum game. And again, it's interesting that Karmapa uses this term because this is a very Western term. And what a zero-sum game is that there is a limited amount of whatever it is that is being competed for. And if you gain, the other person or other organization has to lose an equal amount. So let's say there's a total of 100 whatever, $100. And if you gain $10, then somebody else has to lose $10. That's what a zero-sum game is. And you could be talking about $100 billion, but it's the same thing. So the problem is that we quantify everything, and we have limited resources in the material world, and no matter what the object is. But on the other hand, there's a lot of things that can't be quantified, like loving kindness, compassion, gentleness, and so forth. But getting back to the material world, when we treat things as a zero-sum game in the material world, and it's all about what I can obtain, then the resources aren't shared and the problem becomes worse. The paradigm shift has to happen, and this shift is that we need, and the world needs to look at the vantage of interdependence, or the vantage point of interdependence. We have this connectedness rather than separateness. Quote, when we act from an emotional awareness of that connectedness, the reorientation can transform not only our personal relationships, but global society itself. So sharing increases our inner resources, that our happiness is unlimited, it's renewable, and it increases when it is shared. So this is actually the opposite of a zero-sum game. Here, everybody benefits. And when we can experience this way, everything changes for the better. Now, the next section, this was kind of an introduction to this chapter. The next section is titled Rethinking Competition. At the present time, the drive to compete is valued very highly. It's encouraged, and he says practically required in our society. You've got sports, business, beauty pageants, advertising, grades, cooking contests, non-competitive sports where you're really competing with yourself. I'm adding some of these. And then I've got stunts on TikTok and other social media where people are doing very dangerous things, and then somebody else has to go and do one better than you, and then eventually someone gets killed falling off a cliff or off a building or whatever. But there's this competition with other people. There are just so many forces that are stimulating this competition. And it's between individuals, it's between companies, between communities, between countries. The problem with competition is there's no finish line. So you come out on top of one competition, but that just means that you've got to continue competing. And then with the competition comes jealousy or arrogance. Take your pick either way. I am great. Look at my trophy. Or look at the sales that I got for being the best salesman in the company and yada, yada, yada. It's limitless. The mind has no limit on what it can desire. And that the desire, since it is empty, it's bottomless. You can put as much in as you want, and it doesn't even begin to fill it up. Then third, we don't end up where we wanted to go to begin with. We end up going where everyone else is headed. It's following the crowd. When I was younger, there was the term the rat race. And who wants to be the winning rat? I haven't heard that term for a long time, but I think that it's very appropriate here in this competitive and competing paradigm. So when we are living competitively, we're always reaching for more. Just stimulates and strengthens these inner conditions that cause us to be disturbed. When I say disturbed, I mean the opposite of at ease. To be, you might say, at ill ease and feeling troubled. It destroys our happiness. There can be resentment, jealousy, dissatisfaction, greed, and so forth. And this is a sign of my age, but I kept thinking of the Rolling Stones, and I can't get no satisfaction. I'm sure it's still on YouTube in many forms by the Rolling Stones, and many other people have done covers. Quote, building our society or personal lives on competition means we are building lives of guaranteed dissatisfaction. There are both winners and there are losers, and both are dissatisfied. The winners are worried about losing or not winning enough, and the losers are feeling downtrodden. They're feeling like losers. Boy, there's been a lot of talk in politics lately about losers. Who is a loser and who isn't a loser and who's accusing who of being a loser and so forth. So I don't have to go into that too much. Just watch the news. We could, Karmapa says, we could measure our progress in life against our own inner standards rather than others or ads, that our standards could be ones that we ourselves have consciously determined to be worth pursuing and upholding. So it's really important to contemplate the four ordinary foundations, which are precious human life, impermanence. And impermanence is more than you don't know how much time you have in your present human body, but also means that you can change your mind because your mind is impermanent. At least what you're holding on to in your mind is impermanent. The change can happen and it can happen quickly, and we can encourage change. The third is karma, and very simply, if we engage in virtuous behavior, this will plant virtuous seeds, which will help us create a better future. And if we do the other and do engage in negative action, we're planting negative seeds, and this will lead to more suffering in the future. And then the fourth one is there's no really satisfactory place to hang out in samsara. The rich, the famous, or just to point out something that is a very common thing for wealthy men is you've got to have a trophy wife. But then they get older, and then maybe you need another trophy wife that's younger, and so on and so forth. There's just no safe place in samsara. Again, if you look at the news, there are wealthy people that hire a hitman to take care of a family member or whatever. Enough of that. The other thing is to contemplate the Four Noble Truths, the truth of suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of cessation of suffering, and then the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. And finally, he talks about the importance of loving kindness and compassion. So that finishes that section. The next section is titled Tapping Our Inner Resources. There's this unthinking rush to upgrade what fuels our consumer culture. Companies have large budgets to convince us to get the latest digital device, the latest fashion, the latest cars, a kitchen upgrade, the best vacation. It's endless. I'll have to say this, that when I go to the medical clinic, there's always a TV screen on, and for some reason or another, it's always has a home renovation program on. Now, I don't know why, but it's a home renovation. And you know, your house never looks as good as these renovated houses. I don't see them publishing costs of these renovations, but they always then have an interview with a homeowner that's saying, oh, this is fabulous, wonderful, yada, yada. And maybe they're doing it free just to be able to film this and put it on television. Anyway, there's just endless promotion out there of you need something that you don't have. And this is new, at least new to my generation, the social media influencers. Take your pick what it is, whether it's makeup, rearing children. I don't know. I don't watch these things on social media, but you hear about them. It's hard not to. And of course, these influencers get paid a lot because of their videos. They get paid by social media companies by how many views they get. I could even, if I had a few more viewers on my YouTube channel, I could get a little kickback. I haven't done that, but anyway, when you have a job, there's encouragement to get promoted, to get better pay. And then, of course, there's more responsibility. I remember having this conversation with the other chaplain there when I was a prison chaplain, and both of us had the same attitude. I don't want to be promoted to the supervisor's position. This does not seem like a good place, a good fit for me. I like being the chaplain. But a lot of people, they want to get promoted, they want more money, and sometimes they're not so happy getting more money along with more responsibility. I know my neighbor works for 3M. He's a very hard worker, and as a result, he keeps getting promoted. And now he has to work at home as well as work on the job site. And it's just more and more work, more and more responsibility. I think a lot of times he's on call any time of the night and day. If something happens at work and he's at home, he's the guy to call. He's on call sometimes. Karmapa talks about cell phones. You haven't even figured out how to use your old cell phone, but now they come out with a new version of it, and people feel inclined, almost powerless to not get it. And I will say this, there is what's called planned obsolescence in these digital devices. I've had it where my version just will not connect with other devices where it would connect with older devices, or you can't upgrade the operating system. You have to get a new phone, and on and on and on. And so you get sucked into buying new digital devices, buying new video games. You remember Pong? I don't think people play Pong anymore. I think that was the first one. There was a little dot that went across the screen, and it just doesn't seem so interesting anymore. So anyway, all of this really requires us to look into the consequences of getting sucked into this kind of behavior, look at our relationships, and maybe our family obligations, our friendship obligations are more important than our cell phone. Again, I found myself doing the same thing. You're with a group of people and you're on your cell phone. So they are programmed to suck you in. Even I get sucked in sometimes, and just think what it's like for a teenager. It gets very difficult to pull back and look at what's really happening. And all of this just promotes stress. It just causes dissatisfaction. I have some questions here that I wrote down, which is, what about family obligations? Do you use your cell phone when you're with others? Do you find it stressful when you are using your cell phone? You can come up with your own questions to really look at this from different angles. So to go on, to finish up this section, when comparing, Karmapa says, look at where you have come from. Look at how those who have less, look at the progress you've made. This can slow down this rush towards dissatisfaction. So look at where you've come from rather than how much you would like to acquire that you don't have yet. The next section is sharing resources. And this one begins by saying it's very easy to feel inadequate. We see what we don't have and we don't see what we do have, which ties right into what I just finished talking about. So you see the latest iPhone and you think, oh, I need that. Well, they're expensive. And then you need to have service. You think that the new one will bring you contentment and satisfaction, and of course it doesn't. A good rule of thumb is if you're not happy before you get what you want, you're not going to be happy after you get what you want, at least not for very long. I have said this, that if that really worked, getting what you want made you happy, then I propose that we pass a law that when a child reaches the age of 1, we have this incredible celebration. The government even pays for it. And the child gets these fantastic presents and all kinds of things to make the child happy. And then after that, he'd be happy for the rest of his life. How about that for a proposition? I don't think that would last to the end of the day. We are not like that. Impermanence, and no matter what we get, the happiness doesn't last. Anyway, if we look deeply into this situation and have some mental clarity, that we can make a decision, buy or not buy, as opposed to I have to buy, I have to get this. Well, I'll put it on my credit card and then I'll pay for it next, whatever, maybe next year. I get credit cards offers like that. No interest for the first year, as long as you make the payment. Of course, then if you miss the payment, it's $40 plus interest. But anyway, there are just so many things out there to suck you into this consumer culture. So the thing is, we need to take a step back and make a decision to buy or not buy and make a rational decision. It might be that you decide that I'm satisfied with what I have, that I don't need to have this new, shall we say, shiny thing, this new shiny toy. Quote, we can teach ourselves to feel basically satisfied, not only with what we have, but also with who we are. And that is my emphasis. It's really important to be satisfied with who we are rather than feeling inadequate. This is a very interesting chapter. He says that many people have trouble seeing their own beauty. He said on a scale of 1 to 10, I guess this is my edition, they might say 2 or 3, and their friends might say 6 or 7. And of course, this is subjective, and we tend to be very harsh on ourselves. He said that there was a study once where you had an artist paint the person's portrait based on their description of themselves, and then they painted another portrait based on their friend's description of the person. And the friend's description of the person, that portrait came out much nicer than the one based on the person's description. Of course, all of this is related to competitive and comparative, the world that we live in at the present time. So he says we need to recognize our inner beauty, and we need to realize our connectedness with others. And we will find that we have everything that we need. You still may need to fill up your car with gas or charge it up if it's an electric car, but you have what you need to be happy, to feel good about yourself, to experience your inner beauty. The next section is finding an inner compass. So there are outer and there are inner forces that keep us stuck in consumerism and competitiveness. Again, consumerism is about comparison with others. We try to measure up with others. And the faults of this way of looking at ourselves and the world is that it devalues our inner qualities. Again, there's no finish line. It feels like if you're not moving forward, you are falling behind. The third fault is we accumulate all kinds of stuff. And what came to my mind is the self-storage units that are sprouting like mushrooms after a rain. When I was young, you didn't see self-storage units, and now they are all over the place. And when I was young, a 2-car garage was a luxury, and now 3-car garages are standard, and you still need a storage unit. Of course, I've got a barn that I put everything in, so I am perhaps fall right in with that group. Anyway, it's amazing how much stuff Americans can accumulate and still not have enough stuff. Now, I live out in the country, and you go by some places and it looks like a junkyard. Old farm machinery, old cars, old, I don't know what it is. I used to go to auctions. This was way back 40 years ago. And I remember being at one auction, and the auctioneer said, "Oh, Joe, he wanted to open up a museum." And it took a long time to sell all of his stuff. And most of it was not worth very much. The next on the list of faults of this is that our own greed leads to dissatisfaction because we don't have enough. Now, there are remedies for these faults. One is to cultivate our own inner standards, our own inner beauty, and so forth. And Karmapa feels that this is crucial today, that this is our most important resource, and it is a underused, underdeveloped resource, and it's limitless. So the next remedy is that we need to have clarity about where our true worth lies and confidence in our own ability to gauge how we're doing in life. Then there is satisfaction, and that is be satisfied with what you have in the present. This, of course, leads to contentment. What comes to mind is this quote from Kung Fu Panda. I believe it was Old Wei, the old master, who said that the past is history, the future is mystery. Today is a gift. That's why they call it the present. I had to say that. So we need to be satisfied with what we have in the present. This leads to contentment. And finally, the last remedy that he mentions is that we need to have courage to go in a different direction. Courage to try something new. Courage to resist social pressure and that feeling of inner discomfort when you're going in a different direction than the rest of the crowd. But if you're hanging out with students of Karmapa, you're in good company when you're going against the social pressures of consumerism. Now, the next section is called blind faith. And here he is talking about the modern trust in science. We expect science to save us from ourselves, from our relentless consumption of the earth's resources. And this is blind faith. He mentioned that it used to be religion that people had blind faith in. And now it's science. And he feels that the blind faith in science is actually stronger than the blind faith with religion. We feel, well, science will figure out clean energy, and so we don't have to worry. Before we run out of fossil fuels, science will figure out a renewable source, or we'll be able to figure out a counter to global warming or whatever. And of course, it's just an excuse for perpetuating our present style of living, our escalating greed, consumption, competition for resources. When I was young, and this was back in the late 50s, early 60s, I remember gas wars, where gas stations would lower their price, where they were probably selling gas at a loss, but they were trying to outdo the competition, and then the competition would lower their prices. Nowadays, gas wars are sending people to the Middle East, troops to the Middle East, and so forth. And needless to say, that is a problem. This, again, is all about greed, and it has a tremendous impact on the planet, other living beings, like the people in these countries that there are wars going on, or what would you say? Let's say civil unrest, and maybe we send a drone in that takes out a few key people, and so on. I think if we look at the foreign policy of the United States, who has the oil and who does not have it has an influence about where we spend a lot of money. So in terms of science, getting back to that, Karmapa mentions that people don't usually ask, who is funding these scientific studies? Is it biased? And how is the research influencing legislation? And then, of course, who is making large contributions to the election of certain people that are running up for election? It's interesting, the history of cigarettes and the scientific study, and how the cigarette companies donated money to certain candidates. And recycling. Originally, recycling was, instead of getting the plastic companies to produce less, they said, well, we'll just recycle. And of course, recycle frequently meant sending the junk plastic over to a third world country. And then they would just dump it in open dumps. And finally, the environmental organizations realized that they had been duped. This really wasn't recycling, it was just covering it up. So it's good to really look into the research that is out there about consumption, about a fuel, various types of cars and other things that, where is this science coming from? Who's sponsoring it? Scientists have egos, and it can get in the way of actual scientific studies. So this belief in science and technology having the power to protect us from literally the consequences of our own actions is ill-founded. By doing that, we continue the same harmful patterns of consumption, and we just leave the scientists, it's up to them to fix things for us, and they can't. So I have this, that we believe in fairy tale happy endings when we trust science. So we need to really look below the surface. We have to look more closely and see what's going on. As consumers, we have to look at the suppliers, the scientists, the policymakers, other citizens, and get more clarity about the process. So what is the solution? He says, summon our courage, stop, change course. And this means reconsidering your way of life and significantly reducing our consumption. Secondly, we can express our skepticism when politicians tell us that science will solve the problem and we don't have to change. Really? It's good to be a little skeptical. Number 3 is that nowadays, everyone on the planet is a consumer, and consumers have to change. Again, I've been over to India, Nepal, China, and they want to be like us. It's surprising how much they want to be like us. They want to have the same things that we have. There's a reason why there are so many people from Central and South America that are trying to get in the border all along the Southwest from Texas to California, because everybody wants to be like us, to have our lifestyle, to be able to consume things like we consume them. But consumers have to change. There isn't enough natural resources for everybody to live the way we do. The fourth point that he makes is that we have to be serious about protecting the planet's resources. It's indispensable, he says. We have to change. We have to change our feelings towards the earth and our habits of consumption. The next section is resources are limited. He says the reality on the ground is that we are all dependent on one another and that everything is interconnected. He says we need to know this in our heart. We can't go to another planet. We're all in this together. Whether we know it or not, we are all in this together. We're all on the earth. We all drink the earth's water. We breathe the earth's air. Change is constantly happening. Things are not changing for the better in terms of the environment and scarce resources. It frequently is too subtle to notice unless you're actually being very careful and keeping records and so forth. Now, this was written, I think, in 2013 is when it came out in print. And the winter of 2023-24 is, I think, going to be a record warm winter across the globe. It certainly has been here in Wisconsin. We had one heavy snow, I think it was 5 to 6 inches, and it's just about all melted now. There's hardly any snow on the ground. And this is not normal in terms of snowfall, and it's not normal in terms of temperature. So the Earth is running out of resources. It is warming up incredibly quickly. And again, our desire has no natural limit, that we have to limit our desires before it's too late. And it's easy to say, well, yeah, so-and-so needs to limit their desires. They buy more than I do. That is not the case. Each of us have the ability to make an impact. There's a Tibetan saying that goes, we look into the mirror, see a dirty face, and try to wash the mirror. This is about washing our own face, so to speak. So we need to have this emotional awareness of interdependence and how our actions have a direct impact on the environment, on the companies that are producing the products that we are buying. We act like we're not interconnected. He talks about, you can hear stories about people that can live in isolation and live out in the middle of nowhere and not be connected, but that's not true. Even if you're out living in a cave, you are connected with the rest of the world. You're breathing the same air, you're drinking water, and unless you are living like a caveman, you're using technology that has been developed by human beings, and you probably are thinking in a language. And well, where does your language come from? And on and on and on. We are so totally interconnected. If you think about it, we have ties in all kinds of places to other people. Here is a quote: "We urgently need to slow down, relax our minds, and think deeply about how we are living in an interdependent world." We have these inner resources that we can share. We've got loving kindness, compassion, gentleness, understanding. They are all limitless. And the more we share, the more we have. Developing these resources will help us share limited natural resources.